is a former library, and that's why the building looks so familiar. It was the same library where I got my
All right,
card.
great, thank you very much.
That's fun. For you. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much for coming on a lovely Saturday morning, taking time out of your Saturday morning, but we really appreciate it. I just want to thank the Friends of the Boyden Library because they fund a lot of the author talk, so they funded this one, so thank you, and then thank you for all the other things that you do. So without further ado, Eddie Doherty.
Thanks very much, Kathy. How about a hand for Kathy? Does a great job here. So thanks for coming, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to be here today. Actually, the older I get, it's just nice to be anywhere. But I wrote a book called Laughs, Lies, and American Justice. That's my second book, and it's based on my years in the court system. I worked at the Attleboro District Court for 18 years. I was an assistant clerk magistrate there. And then Governor Salucci appointed me clerk magistrate of the Rentham District Court. May he rest in peace. The governor actually appointed me for life, but I decided not to stay for life. I wanted to fish every day and play with our 5 grandchildren who were all in diapers when I retired. So on my last day on the job at the Rentham Court, one of my assistants gave me a shirt to sum up my retirement. It says on the shirt, retirement, stripers and diapers, and that's what it's been all about. So, and I wrote the book under my pen name, East End Eddie Doherty. I use that because I used to fish the east end of the canal so often that some of the other guys started calling me East End Eddie, so I use that for a pen name when writing books, magazines, newspapers, or whatever. And so, you know, I'll just tell you a few different stories from the book, just little anecdotes. And so you would think that, you know, simple procedures in the courtroom are pretty routine, but there's even a twist to some of them. I had a man one day, I wanted to swear him in. I said, "Sir, raise your right hand, please." He put up his left hand, but you know, we all make mistakes. So I said, "Sir, you want to raise your right hand, please?" He said, "I'm left-handed." Then there was a guy who got arrested the night before. I said, "Sir, raise your right hand, please." He thought he was being arrested again. He put both hands up and dropped to his knees in the courtroom. "Get off the floor, please." Then I was doing a hearing with a woman who was charged with larceny. And she came in with a beautiful service dog, a nice yellow lab. So she sat down in the chair and the dog sat down on the floor next to her. So I said, "Raise your right hand, please, ma'am." She raised her right hand, the dog raised his right paw. I know the dog didn't lie. You know, when I worked at the Attleboro District Court, I helped start the jury court there years ago in the early 90s. Before that, if anybody wanted a jury trial, they had to go to Fall River, and that was inconvenient for defendants, victims, police, attorneys, everybody. So everybody's happy when it stayed in the Attleboro court. And I'm sure some of you have served jury duty, and you know that juror questionnaire is a very short form, and the court officer would give me those forms before the trial. And I'd look them over, and one of the questions on the form is list your highest level of education. One juror put down 5 feet 8 inches. And he was the foreman. That was a tough day for justice. Then there was another guy that put down, he said he had an extensive background in law enforcement. So everybody figures probably a police officer, maybe a federal agent. No, he'd been arrested 17 times. He did have an extensive background. And a guy one night broke into a house, stole a TV, and he would have gotten away with it, but the next night he broke into the same house again. So we got arrested by the police. And so I said to him in the courtroom, I said, "Sir, why'd you break in that house a second time?" He said, "Well, you know, first time I took the TV, but I forgot to steal the clicker."
Oh, come on.
I was doing a hearing with a woman one time, about 45 years old, for speeding. And I did everything from speeding to murder. And so this woman is charged with going like, I think it was 60 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. And so she vehemently denies what the officer has just told me in the hearing. And she said she wasn't speeding, she never speeds, they got the wrong person, you know, she hates speeding. She went as far as to tell me that she gets sick to her stomach when she sees somebody speeding. So I look at this woman, she's got a t-shirt, it says on the shirt, NASCAR. Probably for that defense you want to wear something else. I was doing hearings with the state police, and a gentleman comes in, he's about 85 years old. He's charged with going 97 miles an hour. So he comes in, and before I could even swear him in, he looks at me and he says, "Do you give senior citizen discounts on speeding?" It turns out he was going that fast, he admitted to it. So I said, "Sir, why are you going so fast?" He says, "Well, my girlfriend called me and I was going to her apartment, I wanted to get there before she fell asleep." So I gave him a break and told him, be careful in the future. I found him not responsible, so it wouldn't cost him anything. You know, years ago, there was an acronym, ESP, extrasensory perception. It isn't used as much anymore, but it used to be years ago, you'd hear it all the time, you got ESP or whatever. And so one day I'm doing a hearing with a husband and wife, and they are, you know, they're charged with all kinds of things, but there wasn't any violence. There was every other problem you can imagine in this marriage. But the woman, at one point, the wife says to me that, you know, tomorrow's rubbish day, and he's not gonna take out the rubbish. So now this man is incensed that in effect his wife is predicting the future. And so he wants to say to me, what, does she have ESP? But instead he looks at me and goes, what, does she have ESPN? Change the channel. When I worked at the rental court, we had jurisdiction over 8 different towns, and one of them was Foxboro, where we are now. And so whenever there was an event at Gillette Stadium where there were arrests, they would come to my court. And so, you know, that could be for a football game for the Patriots, or a soccer game, or a concert. Well, one night there's a concert going on, a band that was pretty popular, I guess, and a lot of people there. And there's a boy and a girl in the stands in the mid-20s, boyfriend and girlfriend. And this is this girl's favorite band. And so they're having a good time. And all of a sudden, the band starts playing this girl's favorite song. Well, she loved this song so much, it inspired her to take her clothes off and engage with sex with her boyfriend right at the seats. So there's an elderly couple sitting next to him, and the guy's looking at this show until his wife gave him a shot to the ribs and told him to keep his eye on the stage. But anyways, the young couple gets arrested for open and gross, and came to court the next day. And I happened to be in the courtroom at the time when she was being arraigned. And the talk of the court that day was, how did this happen? Because this girl was kind of a meek girl, and she had a good job, she had no criminal record. You know, how did this one song inspire her to do this, you know? And so when I was in the courtroom, when she's being arraigned, a lawyer leans in and he whispers to me, "Hey, Eddie, can you get me the name of that song? I want to play it for my wife." Judge Joe Welch was a great guy. He's up in heaven now. He's my cousin. He was a jury court judge in Quincy, but he sat in other courts too, including the 2 courts that I worked at. And so one day he was sitting in Edgartown District Court on Martha's Vineyard, and he had a drunk driving trial, and the defendant blew a .23, which is pretty high on the breathalyzer. And it's usually high enough to persuade a defendant to plead guilty, but this man wanted a trial, so he's entitled to one. So the trial's going on, and Judge Welch is rolling on the evidence, and finally the evidence is closed, and the jury gets the case. So the jury goes and deliberates, and they come back and they found the defendant not guilty. So Judge Welch says to the jurors in private, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just wondering, you know, .23 is usually a high enough reading that favors the Commonwealth, and could you please tell me why it is that you found the defendant not guilty?" And so the jury foreman stands up and says, "Your Honor, you have to understand, this is Martha's Vineyard Island, and the defendant is the only rubbish man on the island, and if he doesn't have his driver's license, none of us get our trash picked up." So when I worked in the Attleboro District Court, we had this little device that, a little porcelain thing with a well in it. You put water in it, it had a wheel on the top, and use it to seal the mail that went out of the courthouse. And you take the glue pot, you'd run it over the wheel, and it would moisten it. So anyway, this would seal the envelope, and so it came to be known in the office as the liquor, because it licked the envelopes for us. So the liquor could be found on anybody's desk, whoever was the last person to use it. And so there's an opening at the Attleboro Court in the hallway, between the office and the hallway, and it's where the public lines up to for service in the court. And so there was a long line of people there, and so one of my staff wanted to know where the liquor was. So she announces to the whole office, "Who's got the liquor?" Well, there's a disgruntled guy in line who can hear this. He could hear in and out. And he hears her say, "Who's got the liquor?" He thinks she's talking about alcohol. So he looks at the rest of the line and says, "No wonder this line's so long. They're all in there drinking." Javi Nasuti was a good guy. He told me one time, he said, you know, he says, Eddie, some guy stole my wife's credit card. I said, oh, that's too bad. He said, yeah, but I'm not gonna report it to the police. I said, why, Javi? He said, well, the guy's spending less per month than she was. And Javi went to school in Franklin. He went to a Catholic school, and he was in the 3rd grade, and the nuns put out a big spread of snacks for the kids. And there was a table with a huge bowl of apples, and next to the apples is a big platter of cookies. So one of the nuns put a sign in front of the apples, and it says, only take 1 apple per student. Remember, God is watching. So Javi put a sign next to the cookies, and it says, take all the cookies you want. God's watching the apples. So we had a list on the counter at the Rentham Court. It would tell you which courtroom to go to, because there's different things going on. And so when somebody would ask, you just say, you know, is your name on the list? So I go up to the counter and I said to a gentleman, can I help you, sir? He goes, yeah, I want to know which courtroom I got to go to. So I said, well, I point to the list. I said, is your name on the list? He says, oh, I'm on the list, all right. My wife's shit list. And you know, you hear different lingo and terminology in court, and some people, especially on their first day, may not completely understand that. I had a guy ask me one time for a court-appointed attorney. He wanted a court-appointed attorney, but instead he asked me for a court-anointed attorney. Sorry, we don't have any of those. Then there was a guy who wanted a public defender, but he asked me for a public offender. We got plenty of those. I called a defendant's case one time in the courtroom, and he stood up and he said that his lawyer was gonna be late. So I said, oh, what's your attorney's name, sir? He said, you mean my lawyer? Yeah, lawyer, attorney.
Yeah.
And then there was a guy at the counter in for an arraignment. He was summons in. So I went up to him, I said, sir, what are you here for? He said, I'm here for an arrangement. Oh, there's a flower shop right down the street. Then there was a guy, when you request a court-appointed attorney, you have to be booked in the probation department, and they take financial information from you to see if you qualify. So there's a gentleman in there who's being booked, and he hears himself being described as indigent, which means you qualify for an attorney. And so he hears he's indigent, and he goes in the courtroom. Now his case gets called, and the judge wants to know if he qualifies. So before the probation officer can answer the judge, the defendant wants to, he addresses the court, and he wants to tell the judge that he's indigent, but instead he says, Your Honor, I'm indignant. Did the best he could. So my wife Joanne is with us today. Raise your hand, Joanne. And her name is Joanne Doherty, but when Jennifer Lopez became known as J-Lo, her friends started calling her J-Doe, and the name stuck, and now even her mother calls her J-Doe. And J-Doe is not only my wife, but she does a terrific job as my agent. Although most agents take 4%, she takes 100%. But we've been married 42 years, and somebody said to me last week, you know, geez, 42 years, that's a long time to be married. You know, what's the secret to a long marriage? And I said, well, you know, once a week, we go out for a nice romantic candlelight dinner. I go on Tuesday, she goes on Thursday. And I always thought that one of the most important words in a marriage is compromise. And, you know, you gotta know when to compromise. You know, for instance, my bride wanted a new kitchen, and I didn't want a new kitchen, so we compromised, and we got a new kitchen. That's the way it works. Happy wife, happy life. So I'll just tell you one other story from the court. And this kind of comes under the category of people who watch too much TV and become attached to characters on TV. I had an elderly woman at the counter, and she wants her husband committed for a mental health evaluation for some issues, and she's telling me about all these problems. Nice lady, and right in the middle of it, she tells me that she says that you know, my doctor told me to come to the courthouse. So I said, who's your doctor, ma'am? She said, Dr. Phil. Thanks very much. You've been a great audience. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, and I don't know if you can answer it, and it might sound like a dumb question.
Oh, no questions are dumb.
How do they pick when you have to go, you know, jury duty? How do they pick the people that get the the little thing that says, you know, we're on for jury duty.
Yeah.
And other people, you know, when you're talking about somebody and they're like, well, you know, I've never been called for jury duty.
Yeah.
And there's other people that seem to be constantly having their names for jury duty. And I'm only asking this because I'm tired of getting my name and I don't want to go. And I'm like, and I kept saying to my husband, why do they keep calling us when there's all these other people that they sit there and they say, no, I never had jury duty. What are the qualifications for us to have jury duty?
Well, you have to be breathing. No, you sound like a professional juror.
I'm sorry, she was just asking, what's the age for when you don't have to, you can say no.
Oh, it's
Is it 70? That's,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, what you said, ma'am, I hear that from a lot of people, actually. I don't know, some people never get chosen, I don't know why, but they do it from the county, the list in the county, and,
Is it just like people who vote, that's the voting list, that's not?
you know, that's a good question. I'm not sure if it is. I don't know. You know, there's a good argument it shouldn't be just for people who vote, and there's a good argument it should be too. I don't know. Voting's important, but, you know, I really don't know. After 3 years, you're good for 3 years.
Right.
I've been called for jury duty, you know, a few times, and especially when I lived in Attleboro, and I was working in Attleboro, I'd go and sit in the jury box, and all these people, the guys that I've arraigned myself, are sitting next to me, they don't want me on the jury. And then, like, sometimes a judge will come in and ask me to speak to the jurors, because I just happen to be there, you know, explain the process. But after 3 years, you don't have to do it, you know, until it comes back another 3 years.
So you don't know why they would disqualify somebody?
Why, what?
Why they would disqualify somebody when they bring them in to question them? You know how they get rid of people?
Oh, yeah, well, there are peremptory challenges, but then there's other reasons, you know, I mean, had a guy on the drunk driving trial, I remember in Attleboro one time, big guy. It was a drunk driving trial, and he walks up and he's got jeans on with a big belt buckle, says Budweiser. You know, you probably don't want him on the jury, you know, so they excluded him. And then, you know, some people just have unusual ideas about things, and you just want people who have an open mind, and people are gonna be fair, and, you know, usually through questions, you can do that. You know, it depends on what you do for a living, too, that can factor into it. You know, a whole bunch of different things, they have an opportunity to ask you questions, so. It's one of the most important parts of the job, really, because of the whole system, because, you know, these people are judging others, and, you know, they come there without an axe to grind, and they're, you know, doing the best they can to render justice. And even when you're not, even if you're chosen, or say if you're in the jury pool, and it turns out that everybody pleads guilty, and so they don't need a jury that day, you serve the valuable purpose simply by being there, because if that defense attorney knows there's no jurors there, he's not gonna have his guy plead guilty, you know? And so it's an important part of the process. I always thought it was interesting. I thought it was one of the more interesting parts of the job, the jury court, so, anyway. Anybody else got anything? Yes, ma'am.
What are the actual, what's the job description of a magistrate?
Job description? I don't know, you know, I did it a long time. Well.
I used to assume it was the judge.
Pardon?
I used to assume it was the judge, but obviously I was wrong. I'm just curious.
Well, clerk magistrates and judges are appointed by the governor. I was appointed for life because I was a clerk magistrate. Judges are not appointed for life, they have to retire at age 70. I retired at age 62, but I could have stayed till 92 if I wanted to. I've stayed for the rest of my life. The clerk magistrate in South Boston, John Flaherty, great guy, he never cashed a retirement check. He died in office, I think he was 93 years old. And the clerk magistrate in Quincy right now is probably about that same age. But I was an assistant clerk magistrate in the Attleboro District Court. I was appointed when I was 25 years old. I was the youngest one in the state. And I eventually became first assistant in that court. And so when Governor Salucci looked at my qualifications, he saw that I was an assistant for 18 years in a busy court. Attleboro was one of the busiest courts in the Commonwealth. I think it was the 12th busiest criminal court at the time. So I was running around the police stations all night, releasing prisoners, putting bail on people, and, you know, in the courtroom all day long, or doing hearings, issuing search warrants, and so I guess he thought I was well qualified, so he appointed me.
So, is the job description of the magistrate to do what, the kinds of things that need to be done in preparation for, trials or defendants, or at the request of the judge?
Well, contrary to maybe some popular belief, I didn't work for the judge, okay, but I had people on my staff help the judge in the courtroom. They served as session clerks, or when there was paperwork that needed to be done, a minimus that puts a person in jail, the judge would order that, my office would prepare that, or habeas corpus to get a guy out of jail, to bring him in for a hearing, or things like that, or a bailment, which is the judge set bail on someone. You know, the preparation for trial, that's from the attorneys. Both attorneys do that, the attorney on either side. You know, we have a tape recording of the process, we take care of that, but there's not really much in preparing for the trial. But all the paperwork came through my office, plus I did hearings for, you know, everything. And I did small claims hearings. Small claims, you could file that for up to $7,000. I think it's still the same, I'm not sure, but, so I did hearings all day. If the police gave you a speeding ticket, you want a hearing, you'd come see me, not the judge.
I think I threw myself at the mercy of the court there.
Oh, yeah? Was it me?
I'm not sure, it's a long time ago.
How'd you make out?
Actually, very well.
Oh.
I had everyone behind me giggling though.
Oh, yeah? Well, that's good, I'm glad you had a good day in court.
I was treated very fairly.
Well, that's good. I used to try to give people a break on nonviolent offenses, as long as they didn't have a really long record of speeding or whatever it was. But I would do everything from speeding to larceny. If it's a misdemeanor, you have a right to have a hearing. And so, you know, we had a lot of hearings, motor vehicle and other hearings. And I would do that, and my assistants would do it. So it got to be a pretty busy place. And I had a good-sized staff that would handle all the paperwork and everything else, too. So.
Yeah, the officer who wrote up my ticket said that I had gone through a red light, and then because I got stopped, it turns out I didn't have my license that day, so I had 2 tickets.
Yeah.
And when he went to call in to identify me, you know, with my registration, something happened. It took like a really, really long time, and he was just so worked up that by the time he wrote up both those tickets, I'm like, how much money do I owe? Oh, I'm gonna go in for this. And anyway, so it
Well, see,
wasn't
that
anything.
was-
Sorry, what?
I was just gonna say, that was operating without a license in possession, which is nowhere near as serious as operating with a license, period. It was operating, if you didn't have a license, you could be arrested. But what you had was CMVI, civil motor vehicle infraction, and that calls for a fine. And you come see me, and I tell you to behave yourself and don't do it again.
Carry a license, yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
I have a question that's kind of off track in a sense,
That's
but
okay.
with all of your experience in court, do you have a opinion on the Karen Reed trial?
Has it been
Yeah.
going on too long?
Well, you know, I'm asked that everywhere I speak.
Oh.
And I'll give you the caveat that is that, I have a opinion, but it's not, you know, as well formed really, because I don't see the whole trial. I've only seen little bits and pieces of it. But from what and so that's the important caveat that I'm telling you, but from what I've seen, my best guess is that she hit her boyfriend by accident, and that she didn't know she did it. And maybe
She was
because
drunk.
she was intoxicated, maybe it was a snowstorm, whatever it was. And so, that's my opinion. But again, you know, there's a lot of conflicting stories in this trial, and even the experts have conflicting testimony. And so, you know, the mechanical experts and engineers. And so, you know, that's my best guess, but again, it's just a guess, so. What do you think?
I agree with you.
I agree with you as well.
Yeah.
So in a sense, they overcharged her, which is what's making the
Drag on.
coming to any consensus so difficult. In other words, charging her with murder. I think that's why the juror in the first trial, like, couldn't come to an agreement.
I think they're all crooked myself. I mean, the stuff that they've gone through with the police and lying I mean, but again, you know, you listen to the TV, you listen to the radio and stuff,
Yeah,
and
it's all
what's
media.
fiction and what's nonfiction, I think it's very hard, in my opinion. You know, that's one of the reasons why I asked you, because I have to go do my jury duty on August something, and I'm saying to my husband, I wanna go there. I said, it's gonna be a real,
Oh, in Denham?
yes, and it's gonna be a real, I don't wanna say the word show, but, you know, so I pushed it back to.
So you had jury duty in Dedham with Superior Court?
I don't know, all I know is I have jury duty, I was going to jury duty on August 27th, and, I was having a fit, cause I didn't wanna go.
Do you live in Foxboro?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
How come they don't send you to Rentham, so close?
well, they
always
do
get
sometimes, you know, it depends, you can
It's
go
a-
anywhere in Norfolk County,
Yeah.
but.
Cause the last time I had to go, and I had to go to, well, I had to go to,
I had to go to Quincy.
yeah. No, I got called once for Rentham, and they said they didn't need me. All the good ones that was close, and then I had to go to Dedham. And then I sat there from 8 o'clock till 12 o'clock, because we had to go to the court, to an empty court, because this guy couldn't decide whether he wanted a jury or whether he wanted the judge to, you know, and that, we only sat there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 12, and then we got to go. And
Well, when you're in Dedham, make sure you go to the Central Street Deli, you'll love it there. I actually, when I was appointed clerk magistrate, I trained for a week in Dedham. Usually I do it for a month, but the Chief Justice said to me, you know, you've been doing this 18 years, Eddie, well, just make it look good, go to Dedham for a week. So I was in the Dedham District Court. And the first day, Patty Bellotti, Frank Bellotti's daughter, she was a court officer there, she said, we're going to the Central Street Deli, you'll love it. I went there, I got a big plate of veal parmesan and chicken parm, brought home to Joanne, she loved it.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked that question, cause I don't know what's going on, but I don't wanna be there in August, so I pushed it back till.
The traffic in that area right now is
Oh, yeah, I have a friend that lives there,
Unbelievable.
he said it's pretty bad, yeah,
The what?
traffic.
traffic.
Oh, it's awful.
But that'll be done by the time you're there, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, that's why I decided, and then I'm like, then that's when I found out, I said, well, how old do you have to be, you know, to say, I'm too old now, I don't wanna do it, and you have to be 70.
Yeah.
And I'm not there yet.
Couple of years, yeah.
Couple of years. This will be my last one.
I go to coffee on Tuesdays and Fridays with this group, 8 of them are lawyers. So they all have an opinion.
Oh, yeah?
And what, now their opinion is that if they would've just, because this is costing the state an awful lot of money, if they would've just dropped the charges to involuntary manslaughter,
Right.
Yeah, from the
it
beginning,
might
yeah.
be over.
So you have coffee with all these lawyers, is that?
Yeah,
Yeah? So what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm in pipeline
You're
pipeline
retired.
industry, I'm retired now.
A pipeline what?
The pipeline, oil and gas.
Oh, yeah, okay,
But they're all lawyers and they all have an opinion.
yeah.
And so we're all debating this defense team. And one of the guys, the way he explained defense lawyers was, if you take a pressurized container, the prosecutors will focus on the pressurized container. The defense team will look for the tiny bit of air getting through, and that's what they're gonna go after to turn the jury around.
Well, what they're gonna do is they're all gonna do the best job they can for their client, you know? They've got this pretty complicated trial with some of the testimony, but, anybody have any other questions?
Can you pick what court you want
Yes.
want your jury duty for? Because I always went to Quincy and then I did go to Dedham one
And
time,
where do you live, sir?
right here in Foxboro.
And you went to Quincy District? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's,
Four
yeah.
times.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got called.
I never went to Rentham.
They
Yeah.
thought I didn't.
No, you
Never
can't,
went to any
Could I-
you can't pick it, but you could ask for it.
You could.
You could ask for it, especially if you had some reason you're gonna pick up some
Yeah,
kids
I
at
got my
school or
nose,
something
go to
like that.
Quincy.
But
I
they
didn't mind
lied.
Quincy. Quincy wasn't really that big. Dedham is huge, you know. There was 120 people when I went in. And they left 20 people on the roof, and 100 people went off to 7 different courts, I guess. And they let me go in another half hour, but.
Well, next time, just ask for Rentham. I don't know if they'll accommodate you, but you can
Oh,
always
no,
ask.
I'm over 70 now, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about it.
I'm done with it, but I was just interested.
You think you're 50, that must be all that clean Foxboro living. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, thanks very much, folks, thanks for coming, I appreciate it.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, yeah, I used to get them every 3 years, it would come, and it's like, it's crazy, and that was 3 or 4 times, okay. And then I went,
Well, this team was, they're down in
I
Connecticut.
went to Dedham.
Oh, yeah.
Where are they playing now? Working at night, and this person, and I got
But,
pissed off,
yeah,
Jerry,
it
that
was 22 to 5.
That's,
4
yeah,
days,
that's,
And then
we
all
had to
5
go,
points.
4 days back and forth, we had to go. And on top of that,